Rain hammered against the tall glass windows of the Delgado estate, like it wanted to break in. Inside the grand mansion, the only sound was the soft, rhythmic scrubbing of a brush against marble. Elena moved quietly through the empty hallway, her maid uniform slightly damp at the sleeves. It was past midnight. The other staff had long gone to their quarters, but she stayed behind. She always stayed behind. She told herself it was because she needed the extra money, but deep down, she knew the truth. She was looking for something, or someone. Her fingers tightened around the brush as she reached the tall portrait at the end of the corridor. Don Rafael Delgado, the man whose name alone made powerful men lower their eyes, the same man whose roof she had been living under for the past 8 months, without him ever knowing who she really was. She never looked at the portrait for too long. It hurt in a way she couldn't explain. A sudden flash of headlights cut through the rain outside. Elena froze. The convoy was back. Don Rafael was never supposed to return tonight. His meeting in the city was meant to last until dawn, but something had gone wrong. She could feel it in the way the cars pulled up too fast, the way the doors slammed harder than usual. Elena quickly gathered her cleaning supplies and tried to disappear into the shadows of the east wing. Her heart was already racing. She had survived 8 months without being recognized. She couldn't afford to slip now. But fate had other plans. The heavy front doors burst open. Cold wind and rain rushed inside, along with 6 armed men. And then, him, Don Rafael Delgado, stepped into his own mansion like a storm, wearing a tailored black coat. His dark hair was wet, a thin cut bleeding above his eyebrow. His eyes were colder than the rain outside. Something had clearly gone very wrong tonight. The staff, who were still awake, rushed forward with towels and questions, but Rafael barely looked at them. His mind was somewhere else, calculating, furious, dangerous. He walked straight through the grand foyer, his expensive shoes leaving wet prints on the marble she had just cleaned. And then he stopped. His eyes landed on the small figure trying to slip away at the far end of the hallway. Elena! She kept her head down, shoulders hunched, doing everything she could to become invisible. But something about the way she moved, the way her left hand slightly trembled, made Don Rafael's entire body go still. The entire hallway seemed to hold its breath. Even his men sensed the sudden shift in the air and stopped talking. Rafael's cold gaze sharpened. He took one slow step forward, then another. Elena could feel his eyes on her. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to keep walking, to not turn around, to not give him any reason to look closer. But her feet betrayed her. She stopped. The silence in the mansion was so thick, it felt like it could choke her. Don Rafael studied her from behind, the curve of her shoulders, the way her dark hair was tied in a simple ponytail, the faded scar that peeked out from under her collar near the back of her neck, a scar he had only ever seen once before, on a little girl he had lost 20 years ago. His breath caught in his throat. "Turn around." His voice was low, rough, and carried the kind of authority that made grown men flinch. Elena didn't move. "I said, turn around." This time, the words were quieter, but far more dangerous. Slowly, as if the air itself had turned heavy, Elena turned to face him. Her eyes met his for the first time in nearly 2 decades. For a moment, the most feared man in the city looked like he had been punched in the chest. The color drained from his face. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. The bodyguards standing behind him exchanged confused glances. They had never seen their boss like this. Never. Elena's heart was slamming against her ribs so hard she was sure he could hear it. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell him everything and nothing at the same time, but she stayed silent, because if he truly recognized her, then everything she had planned for the last 8 months was about to collapse. Don Rafael took one more step closer. His eyes searched her face like a man drowning, looking for proof that what he was seeing was real. The scar, the eyes, the small beauty mark just below her left ear. It was her. It was really her. His voice, when it finally came out, was barely above a whisper, but it carried through the entire mansion like thunder. Everyone, get out. The staff and bodyguards froze. They looked at each other, unsure if they had heard him correctly. Raphael's eyes never left Elena's face. I said, get out, all of you, now. This time, no one questioned him. The bodyguards quickly ushered the confused maids and butlers out of the hallway. Within seconds, the grand corridor was empty, except for Don Rafael Delgado and the girl he had buried in his heart 20 years ago. Elena stood completely still, her cleaning brush still clutched in her shaking hand. Rafael stared at her for what felt like forever. Rain continued to lash against the windows. The only sound was the distant ticking of the antique clock in the foyer. Then, in a voice that sent chills down her spine, he spoke again. Tell me your real name. Elena's throat went dry. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Raphael's jaw tightened. His next words were not a request. They were an order that would change everything. And when he finally gave that order, everyone who heard it would remember this night for the rest of their lives. Don Rafael didn't speak another word in the hallway. He simply turned and walked toward his private study on the second floor, his wet coat dripping onto the marble. Elena stood frozen for a few seconds, unsure whether she was supposed to follow or stay where she was. But then his voice came from the stairs, low and commanding, leaving no room for argument. Come. She followed him with slow, reluctant steps, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear the rain anymore. The mansion felt different now. Every shadow seemed darker, every corner more dangerous. When they reached the heavy oak doors of his study, he pushed them open and stepped inside without looking back. She hesitated at the threshold for only a moment before entering and quietly closing the door behind her. The study smelled of aged leather, whiskey, and rain. A single lamp burned on his massive desk, casting long shadows across the room. Raphael stood with his back to her, staring out the tall window at the storm raging outside. For almost a full minute, neither of them spoke. The silence was so heavy, it pressed down on Elena's chest until she could hardly breathe. Then he turned. His eyes were no longer the cold, emotionless eyes of Don Rafael Delgado. They were the eyes of a man who had just seen a ghost. He looked at her like he was afraid she might disappear if he blinked too long. Elena kept her gaze lowered, her hands clasped tightly in front of her Maid uniform, the same uniform she had worn every single day for the past 8 months while living under his roof. Elena, he said, testing the name on his tongue like it tasted bitter. Is that what you've been calling yourself? She didn't answer. Raphael took a slow step closer. Look at me. She lifted her eyes. The moment their gazes met again, something inside him cracked. He saw it clearly now. The same eyes that used to look up at him when she was small, the same slight tilt of her head when she was scared, but trying not to show it. 20 years had changed her face, but not enough to fool him once he truly looked. Your name, he said, voice rough. Your real name. Elena's throat felt tight. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times in the dark, while cleaning his floors and making Chris coffee, but nothing had prepared her for the way he was looking at her right now, like the entire world had narrowed down to just the space between them. Luna, she whispered. My name is Luna Delgado. The name hit him like a bullet. Raphael closed his eyes for a second, as if the sound of it physically hurt. When he opened them again, they were darker, more dangerous. You've been in my house for 8 months, he said quietly. 8 months of serving me coffee, cleaning my rooms, walking past me in these hallways, and you never said a word. I didn't come here to be found, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Raphael let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. Then why did you come, Luna? To punish me? To watch me from the shadows like I once watched the world for any sign of you? She didn't answer right away. The rain lashed harder against the windows, filling the silence between them. Raphael moved to his desk and poured himself a drink with hands that were not quite steady. He didn't offer her one. He simply stared into the glass like it held answers. I buried you, he said finally, the words barely audible. 20 years ago, I buried a little girl in a grave with your name on it, because that's what they told me happened. They said you were gone, that there was nothing left to find. Elena's chest tightened. She had expected anger. She had expected violence. She had not expected the raw pain in his voice. "I was taken," she said softly, "not killed. They kept me alive. For reasons I still don't fully understand. When I finally escaped, I had nowhere to go, no one to trust. So I came here. I wanted to see the man everyone fears. I wanted to see if he would recognize his own daughter when she stood right in front of him." Rafael's grip on the glass tightened until his knuckles turned white. "And did I?" "You didn't," she answered. There was no accusation in her tone, only quiet truth. "Not for 8 whole months." He set the glass down hard. The sound echoed through the study. For the first time since she had known him, Don Rafael Delgado looked lost. The most powerful man in the city didn't know what to do with the daughter he thought he had lost forever. He walked around the desk until he stood directly in front of her. Up close, she could see the small cut above his eyebrow, the rain still clinging to his dark hair, the exhaustion and fury battling in his eyes. "You should have come to me the day you arrived," he said, his voice low and intense. "You should have told me who you were." "I didn't know if you would believe me," she whispered, "or if you would even want me back." Raphael's expression shifted. Something dangerous and protective flickered across his face. He reached out slowly, as if afraid she might flinch, and gently touched the side of her face with his rough hand. The contact was brief, but it carried the weight of 20 years of grief. "You are my blood," he said, "my only child, and you have been scrubbing floors in my own house while I sat in this chair planning wars and counting bodies." He dropped his hand and stepped back, the softness disappearing as quickly as it had come. The dawn was returning. "From this moment on, everything changes," he said. "You will not go back to those quarters. You will not wear that uniform again, and no one in this house will ever look at you like a maid." Elena's heart started racing again. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet. Raphael's next words came out like a verdict. "But until I understand why you really came back, and what you've been hiding from me all these months, you will not leave this mansion, not even for a second." He turned away from her and walked back to the window, his broad shoulders tense. "And Luna," he added without looking at her, "if you try to run again, I will burn this entire city down looking for you. Do you understand me?" She stood there in the middle of the study, her pulse roaring in her ears, the weight of his words settling over her like chains she wasn't sure she wanted to break. Because for the first time since she had stepped foot in this house, she realized something terrifying. Her father had found her, and now that he was never going to let her go again. The morning after the storm, the Delgado mansion felt like a completely different world. Word had spread quickly among the staff. The quiet maid named Elena was actually Don Rafael's long-lost daughter. No one dared to speak it out loud, but the tension in every hallway was impossible to ignore. The same people who had once ignored her or given her orders now lowered their eyes whenever she passed. It made Luna uncomfortable in a way she hadn't expected. Rafael had given clear instructions before the sun even rose. Luna was no longer to stay in the small maid quarters at the back of the estate. Instead, she was moved to one of the guest rooms on the 2nd floor, a spacious room with tall windows, a large bed, and a private bathroom. The room was beautiful, but it felt more like a golden cage than a home. Fresh clothes had already been placed in the wardrobe, all in her size, as if Rafael had someone work through the night to arrange everything. She stood in front of the mirror for a long time that morning, staring at her own reflection. The maid uniform was gone. In its place was a soft cream sweater and dark trousers that felt too expensive for someone who had spent the last 8 months scrubbing floors. She didn't feel like Luna Delgado. She didn't feel like Elena either. She felt like a stranger caught between 2 lives. Downstairs, Rafael was already in his study, but the atmosphere in the house had shifted. Bodyguards who usually moved with quiet efficiency now stood more alert. Extra men had been called in from the city. Luna could feel the change in the air, the way conversation stopped when she entered a room, the way eyes followed her with a mixture of fear and curiosity. She had gone from invisible to the most watched person in the entire mansion overnight. Rafael didn't speak to her much during the first day. He watched her instead. From the top of the stairs, from across the dining table, from the window of his study as she walked through the garden. It wasn't the cold, calculating stare of Don Rafael Delgado. It was something heavier, something almost painful, like he was trying to memorize every detail of her face, in case she disappeared again. That evening, he called her into the dining room. It was the first time they sat across from each other at the long table, like a real family. The food was brought out by nervous staff who kept their heads down. Neither of them touched much of it. Rafael asked her simple questions: where she had been all these years, how she had survived, what she remembered from before she was taken. Luna answered carefully, giving him pieces of the truth, while carefully guarding the parts she wasn't ready to share. She could see the conflict in his eyes. Part of him wanted to demand every answer right now. Another part of him seemed afraid that pushing too hard might make her run again. So he held back, but the restraint cost him. Every time she gave a vague answer, his jaw tightened slightly. Later that night, Luna couldn't sleep. She wandered the quiet hallways of the mansion she had cleaned so many times before. Everything looked different, now that she wasn't supposed to be invisible. She found herself standing outside Rafael's study again. The door was slightly open. Inside, he sat alone in the dark, a single photograph in his hands. She didn't need to see it clearly to know what it was. A picture of a little girl with dark hair and the same eyes she saw in the mirror every morning. He didn't notice her watching. For the first time since she had arrived, Don Rafael Delgado looked like a man carrying 20 years of guilt on his shoulders. Luna felt something twist inside her chest. This was the man she had come here to confront. The man she had spent months resenting. And yet, seeing him like this made something inside her hesitate. Over the next few days, the mansion became a fortress. Rafael doubled the security. No one was allowed to leave or enter without his personal approval. He told her it was for her protection, that there were people who would use her against him if they found out she was alive. Luna didn't argue, but she knew there was more to it. He wasn't just protecting her from his enemies. He was protecting himself from losing her again. Still, despite the tension, small moments began to slip through the cracks. One afternoon, Rafael found her in the library and silently handed her a book he thought she might like. Another evening, he asked her if she still remembered the lullaby he used to hum when she was small. She did. She hadn't forgotten. But she didn't tell him that. Luna could feel herself getting pulled in two directions. Part of her wanted to stay in this strange, dangerous safety. Another part of her remembered exactly why she had come here in the first place. The real reason. The one she hadn't told him yet. On the fourth night, as rain once again began to fall over the estate, Luna stood at her bedroom window and watched the guards patrolling the grounds below. She could feel eyes on her even now. Rafael's men were loyal, but they were also watching her every move. Her phone, the one she had kept hidden since the day she arrived, vibrated once in her pocket. She pulled it out carefully. A single message lit up the screen, from a number she had hoped never to see again. They know you're alive, and they know where you are. Luna's blood ran cold. She deleted the message quickly, but the damage was already done. The past she had tried to outrun had finally caught up with her, and now it was inside the walls of the one place she thought might keep her safe. Downstairs, in his study, Don Rafael sat with a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at the same photograph he had held nights before. He didn't know about the message. He didn't know that the daughter he had just found was still keeping secrets that could burn his entire empire to the ground. But he would find out soon enough, because some ghosts don't stay buried forever. It had been 5 days since Luna's identity was revealed, and the mansion had settled into an uneasy rhythm. Rafael had stepped out that evening for an urgent meeting in the city, something about a shipment that had gone missing near the docks. He didn't want to leave, but the situation was too serious to ignore. Before walking out the door, he had looked at Luna for a long moment and told her to stay inside her room and not open the door for anyone except him. She had nodded, but the moment his car disappeared down the long driveway, a strange feeling settled in her chest. She couldn't explain it, but something felt wrong. Luna tried to distract herself by reading in the library, but her mind kept drifting. Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy, deliberate footsteps that didn't belong to any of the usual night guards. She closed her book slowly and listened. The footsteps stopped right outside the library door. The door opened without a knock. Marco, Rafael's most trusted captain, stepped inside and quietly closed the door behind him. He had always been polite to her, even when she was just a maid. But tonight, something in his eyes was different, colder, calculated. "Miss Luna," he said with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Don Rafael asked me to check on you. He's been delayed in the city." Luna didn't move from her chair. "He told me not to open the door for anyone." Marco's smile widened slightly. "I'm not just anyone. I've been with your father for 15 years. He trusts me with his life." He took a few steps closer. Luna's fingers tightened around the book in her lap. "There's something you should know," Marco continued, his voice low. "Your father isn't telling you everything. The people who took you 20 years ago, they didn't just disappear. They've been watching this house, and they know you're here." Luna stayed silent, her heart beginning to race. Marco reached into his jacket and pulled out a small photograph. He placed it on the table in front of her. It was an old picture of her as a child, standing next to a man whose face had been scratched out. "They want you back," he said, "and they're willing to pay a lot of money to make that happen. Enough money to disappear forever." Luna finally looked up at him. "And you came to tell me this because..." "Because I can help you," Marco replied. "I can get you out of here tonight. No one will know. Your father will think you ran away again. You'll be free, and I'll make sure you're protected." He took another step closer. Too close. "But if you refuse," he added, his voice dropping, "then I'll have to make a different choice, one that won't end well for you." The threat hung in the air between them. Luna didn't flinch. Instead, she slowly stood up and placed the book on the table. For the first time since Marco entered the room, she looked him directly in the eyes without any fear. "You've been working for my father for 15 years, she said quietly, "and in all that time, you never once suspected that the maid cleaning his study every night was his daughter. That tells me you're either very blind or very arrogant." Marco's expression shifted slightly. Luna continued, her voice calm and steady. "You didn't come here because those men offered you money. You came here because they offered you something bigger. They offered you Raphael's position once he's gone, and the only way to make that happen is to hand me over to them." Marco's face hardened. The polite mask slipped completely. "You're smarter than you look," he muttered. He reached behind his back and pulled out a gun, keeping it low but clearly visible. "We're leaving. Now. If you scream, I'll shoot you in the leg and carry you out myself. Either way, you're coming with me." Luna looked at the gun, then back at Marco's face. There was no panic in her eyes, only a quiet, cold understanding. "You really think my father left me completely unprotected?" she asked. Before Marco could answer, Luna moved. She didn't run. She didn't scream. Instead, she reached into the spine of the book she had been reading and pulled out a thin, sharp letter opener she had hidden there earlier that evening. In one fluid motion, she drove it into Marco's hand, forcing him to drop the gun. He cursed loudly and stumbled back, clutching his bleeding hand. Luna didn't stop. She kicked the gun across the floor and grabbed a heavy decorative candlestick from the table. When Marco lunged at her, she swung it hard across the side of his head. He crashed into the bookshelf, books tumbling down around him. Breathing heavily, Luna stood over him as he groaned on the floor. Blood ran down the side of his face. "I didn't come back here just to be saved," she said, her voice low and shaking with anger. "I came back because I needed to find out who helped those men take me 20 years ago. And tonight, you just answered that question." Marco looked up at her with pure hatred in his eyes. "You think your father will believe you over me? I've bled for him. You're just a girl who disappeared." Luna picked up his fallen gun and pointed it at him with steady hands. "Maybe," she said, "but he's about to find out exactly what kind of man you are." She pulled out her phone with her free hand and dialed a number she had memorized but never used, until now. Raphael answered on the second ring. "Someone tried to take me tonight," Luna said. her voice calm despite everything. "It was Marco. He's working with the people who took me as a child." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Rafael's voice came through, cold and deadly. "I'm coming home. Don't move. And don't let him die until I get there." Luna ended the call and looked down at Marco, who was now staring at her with genuine fear for the first time. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," she said quietly, "because now my father knows the truth. And trust me when I say this, he's going to make you wish you were never born." Outside, thunder rolled across the sky as heavy rain began to fall once again. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of fast-approaching cars could already be heard. The night was far from over, and the real war was only just beginning. Rafael returned to the mansion like a man possessed. The moment his car stopped, he was already out the door, his coat still soaked from the rain, his eyes burning with a fury that made every guard in the driveway take a step back. He didn't ask questions. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked straight into the library, where Luna stood with Marco, gun still in her hand, and Marco bleeding on the floor. One look at the scene was enough. Rafael didn't speak to his daughter first. He looked at Marco, the man he had trusted for 15 years, and something in his face went completely cold. He gave a single nod to the two men behind him. They dragged Marco out of the room without a word. Whatever was going to happen to him would happen far away from Luna's eyes. Rafael didn't want her to see that side of him tonight. When the door closed behind them, only father and daughter remained. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain pounded against the windows, and the only sound in the room was Luna's uneven breathing. Rafael finally turned to face her. His eyes moved from the gun in her hand to the small cut on her arm she hadn't even noticed until now. Something in his expression cracked. "You fought him," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Luna nodded. Her hands were still shaking, but she refused to let the gun go just yet. "I wasn't going to let him take me again," she whispered. Rafael stepped closer. He gently took the gun from her fingers and placed it on the table. Then, without warning, he pulled her into his arms. It was the first real embrace they had shared in 20 years. Luna stiffened at first, years of survival instincts telling her not to trust anyone. But slowly, she let herself lean into her father's chest. For the first time since she was a little girl, she allowed herself to feel small and protected. When he finally pulled back, his hand stayed on her shoulders. "Tell me everything," he said. "No more secrets. No more half-truths. I want to know why you really came back." Luna looked at him for a long time. Then she sat down on the edge of the sofa and began to speak. She told him how she had been taken as a child, not by accident, but because someone inside Rafael's own circle had sold her location to their enemies. She told him how she had spent years moving from city to city, never staying in one place long enough to be found. She told him how she had eventually discovered that the man who ordered her kidnapping was still powerful. And she told him the real reason she had returned to the mansion. "I didn't come back just to hide," she said. "I came back because I needed your resources, your men, your reach. I spent 8 months as a maid because I needed to see who could still be trusted and who couldn't. Marco was never going to be loyal to you forever. I just needed proof." Rafael listened without interrupting. When she finished, he walked over to the window and stared out into the darkness for a long time. "I spent 20 years believing you were dead," he said finally. "And the entire time, the man who took you was still breathing, still walking this earth like he hadn't destroyed my world." He turned back to her, and for the first time since she had known him, Luna saw something new in his eyes. Not just protection, but respect. "You're not the little girl I lost," he said. "You're something else now, something stronger, and I won't make the mistake of treating you like someone who needs saving." Luna stood up slowly. "Then don't. Let me fight with you. Let me help you end this." Rafael studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Tomorrow morning, we start planning. Every contact, every account, every favor I'm owed. We're going to find every person who had a hand in taking you from me, and we're going to make sure they never sleep peacefully again." He paused, then added in a quieter voice, But you stay by my side. No more secrets, no more disappearing. You are my daughter, and from now on, the world will know it. Luna felt something she hadn't felt in years. The slow, careful beginning of trust. Outside, the rain had finally begun to ease. The storm that had raged for days was passing. Inside the mansion, something else was shifting. The balance of power had changed. Don Rafael Delgado was no longer fighting alone. He had found his daughter, and together, they were going to become something far more dangerous than either of them had been apart. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, father and daughter stood side by side at the window, looking out at the estate that had once been nothing more than a prison to her. This time, it felt like the beginning of something new, something unbreakable. And somewhere in the city, the people who had spent 20 years believing Luna Delgado was dead were about to learn the most terrifying truth of all. She was alive, and she had come home.